Florida new law stating that slavery was beneficial to blacks should come as no surprise to black people. Europeans have always taught that us coming into contact with them has been the best thing that happened to us since sliced bread. Understand that. They had tried to teach us that we were civilized through them, ignoring history. Carter G. Wilson wrote The Miseducation of the Negro in 1933. It was published. And they continue to remind you that that book is relevant today. And what I want us as the people to think back at is the fact that they had already taught you that them taking you from Africa, bringing you here is what civilized you. Now, as you look back in history, you begin to learn that you, black Moors, was all throughout Europe, and that you, black people, who they called Moors at the time, right? Civilized Spain had libraries, street lamps, more advanced than London or any nation ran by Greco-European German people, so-called pale-skinned people.
So we're here at a palace just outside of Lisbon to see the painting Seferis del Rey. It includes a figure of a black knight that caught Curtis's eye 2 years ago online and has inspired the whole body of work he's been making here in Portugal.
I just kept trying to zoom in on this pixelated image to see this knight, to be like, is he really a black knight? And then finding out that he is wearing the Santiago of the Red Cross and my last name being Santiago. And it was
Europeans had done so well at destroying the legacy and the history and disconnecting us from our lineage that blacks have to be treasure hunters. We have to be architects. We have to be archaeologists. We have to be raiders of the lost arts in order to connect ourselves to what our history was and what Europeans have done to hide our history. It is ridiculous the amount of loops we have to go through in order to find out these things about where we come from as a people. When you talk about you have this so-called great education system in America. These things were intentionally left out of your education system in order to get you to the lower state of thinking that you are as a people. These things were done so that you not understand how self-sufficient you are as a people. These things are done and left out of the curriculum when it comes to educating your sons and children, because why would they want to build your sons and children image up? So we have to be the great detectives in order to find our history. You have to learn etymology, learning the names of the history and the changing of words. And when you learn those things and begin to read, you begin to read things in medieval times, and you begin to hear names like Swarty person, and you get, oh, that means black. But you do not know these things. If you do not know these things, you gloss over them because you thinking Europe was all Europeans. But when you learn history and you understand that we built the castles in Europe.
This is wild.
So this is someone's house.
Yes.
It's real.
And on top of that, evidence of our existence in Europe at that time is in the hands of private collectors a lot of times. So it's much more difficult for us to have access to, or if they do have a museum has it, they do not display their artwork showing blacks as knights and kings in Europe.
This 15th century former royal palace is now one of the many homes of the Berardos, one of Portugal's wealthiest families.
Oh, I think I found it. Wow.
Much of what we know about the reign of the Moors was discovered in works of art. And although the artist of this painting is unknown, it tells us a lot about the Lisbon of its time.
When you look at a painting online, you can only see so much. Oh, but the way that knight is painted is so beautiful.
He's so noble.
Yeah.
And his eye is on a completely different horizon.
My understanding of the painting becomes dramatically different when I can actually see the interactions going on. When I look at like the people who are lower caste dressed, you see a mix of different nationalities.
The imagery presented in that portrait of Europe doesn't quite make out the imagery of history you've been taught about Europe throughout your school system, now do it. Therefore, the miseducation of the Negro should be very familiar to you. The tactics that Florida is pulling to teach you that slavery was beneficial to you should be familiar, because it's an ongoing tactic that Europeans have been applying to us since their military conquest of us. Let's be clear of that. It went from physical conquest to a mental conquest. And you continue to surrender your children over to be conquered when you hand your children over to your oppressor to be educated, and you do not add or take from that education.
When you say
Or
it's
I wouldn't even say nationalities, but like
cultures.
cultures, yeah.
When you say it's different from what you imagined, what does that mean?
Okay, well, there's more black people. First of all, because the image becomes some images, you can't tell if it's shadow.
Sure.
To the images I'm making than I thought of these two men here. They're like in conversation. And again, I'm drawn to these moments of like mixed race interaction where there isn't a doesn't appear to be like a hierarchy. And see, these are things you can't tell until you see it. And now I can incorporate how the lace is made there, the hint of that. Oh, that face is gorgeous. They have weaponry, so they're of the order, possibly younger, but they're both men of color. I could stare at him forever.
Huh.
The year is 1492. Christopher Columbus is about to embark on his world-shattering voyage to the Americas. And on his way to the coast, he stops off here at Granada. He's the honoured guest of a ceremony hosted by the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. They are celebrating a grand victory. Up until this day, Granada had been ruled by Muslims. But Isabella has managed to wrestle control from them.
Ferdinand and Isabella's victory marks a turning point for Spain and for Europe. The Middle Ages are over, and the West is about to embark on a new epoch of power and discovery.
We tend to think of this as the beginning of an era. In fact, it's the climax of a forgotten chapter in European history: the rise and fall of Islam in the West.
Now, black people, what you have to understand, that Europeans use Arabic, Moors, Muslims, interchangeable in order to disguise the identity of the blacks. When you hear Arab and Muslim, you think of who you see as Muslims now, the Arab people who are projected today, the fair-skinned, more fair-skinned people. But what you have to understand is blacks at one time, we ran that desert. And those at that time were black Muslims. So they use that interchangeable, so don't want you to lose track of that. These were black people who were ruling Spain. But these are not the first group of black people that was in Spain. It was a group of blacks from Africa that was in Spain prior to that, and they was part of the Roman Empire. However, I want you to just understand the language and how their beginning starts with the erasing of your past.
East is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. And it's a worldview that still has currency today. Islam and Christianity seem to have become ideological monoliths, citadels whose gates are firmly closed to one another. But they haven't always lived such separate lives. In the year 711 AD, Muslim forces invaded Spain and created a society so rich and so powerful it was the envy of the known world. This wasn't the rigid, ferocious Islam of our imaginations, but a progressive, sensuous, intellectually curious culture that for a number of spine-tingling years looked set to sweep through the whole of Europe. It is an...
What you have to understand is that when blacks ruled Spain under a Muslim military, Christians, Jews, and Muslims was all able to live together in peace and share ideas and ideology. However, when the Europeans took over, they erased all history of all the blacks. If you notice consistently, no one can live in peace amongst the white people. They cannot integrate into any society in large numbers and live in harmony with any other group of people.
An incredible story, but one that has been systematically written out of history.
After the Catholic monarchs took over the city of Granada, they began to destroy all evidence that the Muslims had ever been in Spain. In the following century, the Spanish authorities persecuted and expelled 300,000 Muslims and burned as many as 1 million Arabic books.
Black America, we have to understand that the process that Florida is doing to brainwash blacks and whites to believe that blacks benefited from slavery is nothing new. Just as if they act as if we were not in Europe, just as they act as if they only came into contact with blacks when they stumbled up onto Africa. Not acknowledging the fact that it was blacks who came into Europe and built civilizations in Europe. Not acknowledging that, wiping that from our history, and then replacing our history with them. Placing themselves throughout all of the movies and imagery in our castles. Because they lived in huts throughout Europe.
This was an astonishing act of ethnic cleansing. It put an end to a civilization which had flourished in Spain for 700 years. These people have become known as the Moors.
Propaganda, sparked by the Crusades, has given us an enduring image. The diabolical Moor, a dark-skinned, savage, alien enemy.
But this character is a complete invention and tells us nothing about who these people really were.
That propaganda should seem familiar. Immediately after slavery, how did they start to portray blacks as savages, rapists, vagabondsmen? That propaganda tactic should seem familiar to us, because this is what Europeans do. To this day, they force us into economic poverty, and then they criticize you for reacting to the conditions that they have created, and make it as if that is your desire to be drug dealers, armed robbers, burglars, not as if that is a reaction to a condition that they have created. So much to the point where they have black people thinking that that is what black people want to be, perceiving and looking at black people as criminals. They have begun to be so good at their propaganda that they have enslaved black people and now have portrayed black people as being lazy. Their propaganda is so strong that they went from willing to die and go to war to force you to labor for them, which they would not do, to being able to call you and have you looked up at as lazy for not doing what they're not willing to do, or for not being willing to work for them, or for having the audacity to want to work and benefit yourself. This is the games and propaganda that these Europeans have been playing for centuries. It is time for you to wake up and stop looking at yourselves through the lenses of these Europeans.
Now, archaeologists and historians are starting to piece together the real story of the Moors in Spain. They're uncovering the remains of hidden cities, discovering the role of Muslims in the revival of the classics, and decoding the meaning of Islamic buildings. A fascinating picture has emerged.
I'm going to use this new research to explore what happened when East met West in Europe.
If there is one place which challenges the stereotype of the treacherous, bloodthirsty Moor, it's here, the Alhambra Palace in Granada. The Alhambra is one of the most complete medieval Islamic palaces in the whole world. It was built by the Muslim kings of Granada in the 14th century, at the height of their power. Its name means the red one, because the dark surrounding soil has given its stones an earthy reddish hue. The marvel of the Alhambra is its mystery. Not a single account of life here survives. All its archives were incinerated in the fires of the Inquisition.
But the Catholics couldn't bring themselves to destroy this place. The Alhambra is one of the wonders of the medieval world. And by preserving it, they've kept a box of secrets that we can use.
See, while DeSantis want to run around Florida and teach that blacks gained trades like blacksmiths in the process of slavery, because he wants to deny and ignore the fact that we created those trades in Europe. We did not gain those trades and skills during slavery. We gained those trades and skills in Europe. We created them and introduced those skills through Europe. Moors was the builders of Europe.
To decode the civilization that built it.
Inside the palace walls, the architecture is breathtaking.
Although the aesthetic of this courtyard is quite cool and minimal now, in its heyday it would have been a riot of colour. Granada was very famous for producing silks, and you'd have had silk hangings billowing in the breeze, and silk cushions and silk rugs where people laid out to eat their dinner and to listen to music. And in fact, it's only when you get down to rug level that you appreciate one of the bits of magic of the place, because from down here, this pool acts like a kind of infinity mirror, and the whole of the palace just looks as if it's suspended in water.
You seeing here black people introducing all types of luxuries to Europe. They stand in huts. Black people living in with infinity pools, silks, drapes hanging. But yet they want to tell you and act as if they came across us as barbarians with spears in the desert. This is the only perception they want to give you. They made sure to erase and eradicate your history, but move in your house. They eradicated who built it, but moved in.
Every detail of the palace decoration seems to be part of a scheme. Row upon row of intricate geometric patterns are carved into the woodwork of the walls and windows.
This is the throne room. It was the symbolic centre of the palace, and here the Sultan had a kind of psychological advantage over his subjects. Whereas he'd have stood here, an eerie silhouette, they'd have been blinded by the light that came streaming in through these brightly coloured stained glass windows.
The 19th century writer Washington Irving observed,
"It's impossible to contemplate this abode of Oriental manners without feeling the early association of Arabian romance. One almost expects to see some dark eye sparkling through the lattice. The abode of beauty is here, as if it had been inhabited but yesterday."
But this is far more than just a beautiful building. There's a specific reason why it feels so harmonious. The men who built it had a knowledge of complex geometry which had originated in the ancient world. The first man to set down these mathematical principles was...
Now, you can clearly see that we introduced this mathematics to these Europeans, and not just that, that is not the only castle we built in Europe. That is not the only area we ruled in Europe. You have to understand these people have intentionally left us out of history. They have intentionally took us out and placed themselves into our photos. This is what Europeans have been doing when it comes to writing and marking down history. Castles in Europe built by Moors. These are castles in Europe credited to being built by Moors, which are described as black people. I just did a Google search, castles in Europe built by Moors. So when you talk about the miseducation that is done to black Americans, it's when Europeans try to make like they taught us building, mathematics. When they talk about the skills like locksmith, we came here with those skills. Some of our last names are Smith, not due to slavery, but due to the fact that that was your family trade. Do your history, do your research. That was your family trade in Europe. Blacks was in Europe, so the concept that they went to Africa and civilized blacks was always a lie, always a falsehood. This is why they burnt the books in Spain, so that they continue this falsehood. Stop allowing other people to educate your children. You're going to always be disappointed with the outcome as long as you continue to hand your children over to the oppressor. Your children are never going to be prepared to uplift themselves out of their current condition because they're going to be taught self-hate. They're going to be taught that they are less than someone else because that is the design of this system in order to empower them. They have to convince them that they are something that they are not. They have to convince black people that you are beneath white people, that you are in this status and state in life because you are less than them. They can't acknowledge the fact the only reason they are in this position is because they are war-mongering people and they have a higher tolerance for violence and death.